So the recording has started and ready to go.
All right. So, just to start off, no matter who you are, where you are from, or your immigration status, you have rights. You have the right to be free from abuse and mistreatment. You have the right to be paid fairly. You have the right to be free from sexual harassment and exploitation. You have the right to a healthy and safe workplace and a healthy and safe home environment. The US immigration system is imperfect and outdated, but the system does have multiple forms of legal options for people who have been subjected to abuse. Let's talk about them. I'm honored to introduce Jessica Yañez, an immigration attorney and North Carolina board certified specialist in immigration law. With a Doctor of Law from Ellen University School of Law and a background in teaching immigration law, Jessica is passionate about human rights, transitional justice, and international law. Jessica will be presenting a talk titled Armed with Knowledge, Visa Options for Protection of Women Against Abuse, where she will provide practical insights on how to seek help if you are experiencing harassment or abuse without fear of losing your visa status. Her innovative approach to legal education and commitment to the protection of vulnerable women make her an exceptional speaker. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Kamala, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have this talk. I feel like this is one area of the law where more information needs to be made available to people. I think that this is a difficult situation for people to be in, and a lot of times people feel alone. They may feel shame. They may feel like they have nowhere to turn. And so today is going to be really valuable. So thank you. Thank you for moderating.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Just to begin with, can you give us a quick insight of what are the categories of visas that women belong to who may be, prone to abuse or mistreatment?
Of course, yes. So today we're going to focus on international students. We're also going to talk about dependents, so people who have maybe an H-4, dependents in the non-immigrant visa category. And we'll also talk about non-immigrants who hold their own employment-based visas, H-1Bs, L-1s. So
Okay.
all the information might not apply to everybody that is listening today, but people may know someone that is in a particularly difficult situation, so they would be able to connect that person with the resources that they need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So just to begin with, you did mention international student visa. So can you talk us through what abuse or misconduct looks like for students or women in particular in international student visa?
Of course, yeah. So one that jumps out is that there are scams and fraudulent people that are trying to get people to come to the U.S. as a student, only to learn that maybe the school isn't even accredited. So that has happened in the past. They're also particularly related to women, crimes committed against women, and they may be afraid to come forward if they hold a student visa. So some things to look out for, of course, would be mistreatment, people that are threatening someone by saying, I'm going to call immigration on you if you do XYZ. So I think just for someone individually, what they would need to look out for is, do I feel afraid? Do I feel like I am being mistreated? And then once they are feeling that way, reaching out to the people to seek the relief that is available through the immigration laws and through state and federal laws.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. And is there options? I know you were going to get to that, but what are the legal options that are available for such women without jeopardizing the visa status?
Yeah, there are definitely options available. So I'm going to discuss multiple forms of relief that are available to people today, because we know that student status is not going to last forever. I would love to be a student for forever, but we know that that's temporary and the years pass by quickly. So one, if somebody has suffered harm in their home country, or if conditions have changed since arriving to the United States, while they're in school, asylum may be one option. So asylum, we're showing that we have a fear of returning to our home country and that we'll be persecuted for a certain reason. So one thing that comes to mind, happened late last year was the morality police, I believe it was, that killed a young woman in Iran. So if I am a student, I'm a woman in the United States on a student visa, and things have escalated in my home country to the point that I fear returning, then asylum would be one option.
Okay.
And then looking at the harm that one has experienced here. So the three words to remember are force, fraud, coercion. So an example may be if one is a student and they're not allowed to work, but somebody is forcing them to work and not paying them appropriate wages. If they have talked them into some type of fraud and then use that against them, right? So they're saying, now you can't call immigration because you're a part of this fraud. So it really creates isolation for people. It really creates fear. And this doesn't have to do with anybody's education, their country that they're from, their socioeconomic status. This happens across the board. So keeping in mind that if the harm occurs in the United States, where they've been brought to the United States and they're forced to engage in work that they do not want to, that could be labor, that could take the place in commercial sex trafficking. There's a T visa that's available for people. And so one is not going to just sit and say, like, I'm experiencing this type of harm. I think I qualify for a T visa. So these are forms of relief that aren't discussed very often, especially not in public forums. And so the T visa is meant to help people that are the victims of trafficking. And then the U visa is also a form of relief that's not as widely known. That's if somebody suffered from a particular crime. So you can go onto the USCIS website and you can read about the particular crimes that qualify someone for that type of relief. So they're a harm to the person. So one can be, for example, extortion. I recently worked with someone that their employer, and we'll talk more about this later on, subjected them to extortion and threatened to call immigration on them. So anytime you hear threats, anytime someone has taken your documents, they've kept your passport, they won't return those, you know something is wrong. So just trust your instinct. So you can say something is not right here. And then also for people who have the J1, there is for some people a 2-year home country requirement. But there is an exception to that 2-year home country requirement. You can file a waiver if you fear persecution in your home country. So that option is available. So it's really looking at, is the harm I fear from my home country, or is the harm that I fear that I've experienced within the United States? That's one of the initial questions. And then seek relief based on that. So another option that several students have been able to pursue in the US in recent time is temporary protected status. So they may be in the country, in the United States, and their home country is experiencing civil unrest, political violence, natural disasters. And so people are allowed to have more than one status that they're seeking at the same time. So so yeah, but I know I get excited and talk a lot about this. So
no, I think you had to, the purpose of the talk itself is to bring out awareness that these are so many legal options that does exist. Like you beautifully pointed out, it doesn't get put out in a public forum, but still it's important that we talk about it. So thank you so much. Continue being excited and give us more details about it. If I may ask you a follow-up question, identifying abuse or mistreatment was the major chunk of your discussion, and you did mention about the legal options available, such as the U visa or the T visa. So say I've identified that I've been mistreated and I know the legal options, but given the sensitivity of the issue, I would have to find ways to pursue those options in such a way that I'm still not scared. So can you elaborate on that? How can I pursue such options?
yes, so there are a few numbers that I want to provide. So one is a human trafficking hotline. and it's 1-888-373-7888. And we can provide that information too when we post this. The
Yep.
other is a domestic violence hotline, and that's 1-800-799-7233. Immediate danger, of course, would be to call 911.
Yep.
So there's a common misconception sometimes within immigrant communities that they cannot call the police because the police are going to contact immigration, and that is not true. So it's
Okay.
really important to know that if somebody is in a dangerous situation or they've just been the victim of a crime, first thing to do is call 911. And so the local authorities are going to pursue legal relief based on state laws, right? But by calling these phone numbers, you also have access to people who are going to be able to provide, if necessary, temporary housing. If someone is experiencing intimate partner abuse, so a form of domestic violence with their partner, they can have assistance to obtain restraining orders. And so it's not just immigration assistance that people need, right? So first is the immediate need met, like, am I safe? So once you have established that, you've got your immediate safety taken care of, then you're going to look at, what do I need to do in the short term? So short term is reaching out to legal resources that will be able to help. And nearly every state has a legal aid office or the equivalent of legal aid. So they provide low cost or even pro bono or free services to people. And there are also immigration attorneys. So depending on which state you live in, you may look for an immigration attorney and hundreds of people pop up. So you want to reach out to an immigration attorney that specializes in this type of case.
Okay.
So a good thing to do when calling or maybe even emailing is asking the attorney, do you specialize in this type of case? And a lot of times they may say, yes, I do. But if they don't, they can also put you in touch with somebody. And then the good thing about being able to contact attorneys now is that because of the pandemic, so many offices do remote consultations. So you can have a consultation through video conference. It can be on the phone, and everything's confidential. So the immigration attorney can help you talk about what you're eligible for. So one of the things that's really important is for people to keep proof of whatever they're experiencing. So it could be text messages, it could be emails from fraudulent recruiters. And so it's hard, right? Because you're going through this like extremely difficult, traumatic situation, and it's hard to keep track of everything and just day-to-day survival. But keeping track of things, writing things down is very helpful. So as things come up, write them down in the notebook, write them down even in your phone. So that way, when you go to speak with the attorney, they're able to have the information that they need to move forward.
Thank you for sharing that. Like you said, it's not easy to remember and document everything when you are emotionally down and going through a traumatic experience. But something else that caught me during our conversation was how you briefly discussed about violence, or rather the partner violence. And that was going to take me to the next part of the conversation, which was on the dependent, the H-4 visa. So unlike F-1, where you're still a student, but your visa status is not dependent on another person's visa status, but in the case of a dependent H-4 visa status, you might be subject to partner violence, but your visa status might be dependent on your partner. So can you talk us through how misconduct or abuse might happen? Intimate partner violence is just one example. So can you walk us through some examples?
Exactly. So some of the things to look for, people think of domestic violence as physical harm because that's something that we can see, right? And it's not just physical harm. So one thing to look out for is control. So am I allowed to speak to my friends and family on the phone? Does my partner control when I leave the house? Does my partner control all of the finances to the point where I don't have enough money for my basic needs? Psychological abuse, so that can take the form of constant insults, to the point where people start to internalize that and then think, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I am stupid. So it's really hard, because it's like we say, we're a fish in water. So we may not even recognize that until time passes, but we have to listen to ourselves. So when something feels wrong, we are the highest authority on what is good and what's right for us. So if there's only one thing that people remember from today, it's that we don't have to live in fear. Nobody has to live in fear, whether they're a student, whether they're a dependent, whatever their status is. So it's really unfortunate that our immigration system is set up with that power dynamic of, I have the visa and you're my spouse, which means you got to do whatever I say, because if you don't, guess what? I'm going to call immigration, or I'm going to send you home, right? No, like what is that? So the lack of employment authorization for spouses puts them in a very difficult situation.
Yep.
And immigration attorneys can help to explore. Are there other options? Could you seek student status, and maybe eventually obtain OPT? But I don't know if a lot of people realize this. There's actually an employment authorization document law for non-immigrant spouses. So if people can establish that they've been subjected to abuse, then they can apply for that work authorization document as the spouse of a non-immigrant visa holder.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and it's not common knowledge, I feel like, for people to know that those options are available. So that is one thing that people can do.
Yeah, I mean, I myself wasn't aware of that. I thought the employment authorization document was something, again, it depends on your spouse's H-1B. But
Right.
thank you for bringing that out. And out of curiosity, are there more legal options that, women on dependent H-4 visa can pursue?
There are, yeah. And so that is going to be where an attorney comes in, or to just be armed with knowledge, right? So I would start with the USCIS website, the official website. So there is the T visa, again, if somebody has been trafficked. So we do have circumstances where it's a forced marriage. So the person has not even consented to being here. And then I've seen people that arrive, they may not speak the language, they're isolated. So they're isolated geographically, they're isolated, in their house. And so where do they turn? And so that can turn into a trafficking situation when they're being forced into, whether it's labor, whether it's unwanted sexual contact. So the T visa is one option. The U visa requires that the person contact the authorities.
Okay.
So domestic violence is one of the areas that is quite difficult, because once you make that call to the authorities, you fear retaliation by the abusive partner.
Yeah.
So it's important to know that the authorities are there to assist, and then you will be you're put in touch with other organizations that are able to make sure, like we talked about, that those needs are met. So for the U visa, you would have to report that to the authorities and then assist them with the investigation of the crime. So it's one of those things where you need to be well resourced and have a good support system, because if the case goes to court, you will need to go to court to continue, in order for that case to be seen to its completion. Asylum may be another option. So there are multiple options that are available to spouses. And one thing that I wanted to say is that not only is the conversation with the attorney strictly confidential, Also, anything that's filed with USCIS for people that are in the humanitarian categories, like a T visa or a U visa, all of the correspondence is sent to the attorney of record.
Okay.
So it's not going to be sent to the home address. So that ensures that if the person is still living with an abusive partner, that abusive partner is not aware that they are even applying for this type of relief.
Yeah, I think that was probably where my mind was, because it's not going to be easy. Like you said, you need the right support system and resources to pursue something like this. And that would be without the knowledge of the abusive partner. So are there any more tips or suggestions that you'd like to discuss to make sure that you pursue such legal options without the fear of being more abused, or even for that matter, losing your status?
Exactly. So I think it's really important to work with an organization. So, for example, I'm in North Carolina. We have the Battered Immigrant Project. And so there are nonprofit organizations. So finances should not prevent anybody from seeking help.
Yeah.
If somebody does have the financial resources, it's going to be important to work with an attorney that has experience in this field, because they're able to connect people with all of the support that they need, whether it be therapists, whether it be like safe housing, whether that's temporary. Sometimes if children are involved, it's gaining legal custody. So it's really a team. It's really a team that's able to help people as they move forward. But it's not easy, right? So
Yep.
it's not like, oh my God, that like the U visa delays can be years. So, it's not easy to recognize that somebody has been subjected to harm or mistreatment. And then once they have made that realization, it's not easy to do something about it. And
Yeah.
then once you actually apply, it's like, okay, now I did it. But our immigration system, like you said, it's outdated, it's imperfect, but it's better to pursue those forms of relief, even if they take a long time, than to do nothing at all. Because one of the most difficult situations is if someone has done nothing at all and so much time has passed that it decreases the likelihood of success in the future.
Yeah.
But that said, there are some cases where people have been successful, even if the abuse took place many years before. So
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's not easy, but it's better to at least feel protected, or
yeah.
less, reduce the amount of fear you have while you wait. So, yeah, I'm glad that you shared those options. And I know that I'm going to take a small detour into a completely different topic, but something that also surprised me when you were discussing the visas within which women might be prone to abuse was the work visa, the H-1B and the L-1B. So
Yes.
I'm curious to hear, how are women in particular belonging to these types of work visa prone to abuse and misconduct? Can you give some examples on that?
Yeah, so the very first thing that jumps out is, are you being paid the required wage? Are you doing the work that you were sponsored to do? So that's one of the big things. If you are here, you're being paid less than what you're supposed to be paid. You're not doing the work that you were, you thought you were going to come in and do one thing, but they have you doing something completely different. If you're being subjected to any type of harassment or discrimination outside of immigration law, there are so many laws available to protect people from being discriminated against, from being subjected to harassment. So this is honestly one area of the law where we've made continued improvements, right?
Okay.
Because before there was this idea that you're beholden to this employer and they can treat you any old kind of way. And that's not the case, right? So one of the things that I mentioned a little bit earlier is, if an employer is committing fraud and they're somehow trying to tie you into that and then saying, you can't report me because I'll report you. It's like,
Yep.
wow, that's really horrible. Why would people do that? But what I've found, no matter what the instance is, when somebody is in this situation, we can almost say, oh, wow, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that this has happened, or I'm so smart. I can't believe that I let myself get into this situation. And then people start blaming themselves when they haven't done anything wrong.
Yep.
You know, they're being subjected to harm and mistreatment. But then they're somehow thinking that they have done something wrong. And that's not the case. So threats from employers, that's another one. And I know the effort that it takes to leave one's country and immigrate to the United States.
Absolutely.
Aside from all the paperwork, aside from the legal paperwork, leaving friends and family behind, leaving behind the good food, you know, just to be in a new country and the day-to-day struggle, the culture shock, the wanting to excel in your field, wanting to excel in your profession, excel at school. And so then when this happens, it's like, wow, do I just continue forward and at my own expense? Or do I stand up to this company? And it's really hard, right? Because we're an individual. So how do we stand up to these companies? You know, if it's an L, it's a multinational corporation. Yeah.
It's not easy. And I think it's first of all hard to recognize. We end up putting women end up putting the blame on themselves by overthinking that probably they are at fault and not recognizing that they're being mistreated in the first place. So given the elusiveness of this situation, what are the legal options that they have?
Yeah, so there's something actually that came out in recent months that allows people to report employee abuse, exploitation, and that leads to something called deferred action. Mm-hmm. So that is a 2-year status that comes along with work authorization. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Even if someone doesn't have an H-1B or an L, that can be across the board. There is also, of course, I go back to the T visa, to the U visa, but there is a program through USCIS because there's this constant fear of losing status, right? Like I've maintained status from way undergrad, master's, OPT, H-1B. So there's this constant fear of like, whatever it takes to maintain my status. So USCIS recognizes and they apply an exceptional circumstances exception for people that are in an abusive employer situation in H-1B status. So they can forgive the fact that someone has maybe fallen out of H-1B status, or they can grant an exception and even extend that status if somebody can show that abuse.
Okay, so there are legal options out there. And as a follow-up question, like the previous visas, how can women pursue those options once they've identified that they're being mistreated?
Exactly. And this is something that nobody wants to do alone and nobody should do alone, right? So it's not an individual's job to identify the legal reason, right? It's just to know I've been mistreated, I've been harmed, something doesn't feel right. And so then going to an attorney, they're going to be able to help the person that's experienced this report it. It could be reported to the Department of Labor. It could be reported to DHS. So they're going to help, whether it's reporting a crime that the person's been a victim, like I said earlier, of extortion, right? Pay me this amount. And, so many people are brought here and the employers are supposed to pay for the legal fees and then they're indebted, right? So, you've got to pay thousands and thousands of dollars and they're not even earning enough to be able to pay back. So it's just mind blowing because it's normalized. So people may not even realize that this is wrong. That it doesn't matter that hundreds of other people have been subjected to this, or this is the way that it's always been done. So it's just identifying, this is wrong. I don't feel good about it. I don't feel safe. Then taking whatever you have. You don't have to take documentation the first time to your attorney. Just take your knowledge of what has happened and let them know. So that way they can walk you through and they can tell you, this is what we're going to do short term. This is what we're going to do long term. So I think it's common knowledge that people can seek a change of employer, right? So
Mhm.
maybe I'll change employers, or I'll change status to a different type of, momentarily. But that doesn't get at the harm that company subjected the person to. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is a very, again, sensitive, vulnerable, complicated area. So
yeah,
identifying it, like we saw throughout the talk, identifying it that you're being abused or mistreated would be the first step. There
yes,
are legal options out there, but having hopefully a good support system and resources to pursue those legal options without fear would be the next step. I would like to summarize a talk like that. I know we were splitting the talk between the three visas, but now I would like to give the floor fully to you to see if you have anything more to share or suggestions or tips.
thank you. I would just say that nobody is alone. I think that a lot of times people could feel completely alone, or like they're the only one that has experienced this. And then when they realize, no, that other people have been in this situation, and they've overcome that harm and that mistreatment, and they're not defined by it, right? So we're not defined by somebody doing something wrong to us, whether it's a partner, whether it's an employer, but that person needs to be held accountable, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we can move on. We can go to a different school. We can get a new employer. But then what? This abusive person or this abusive institution or organization is going to keep repeating that same behavior. So I do feel like that the U.S. immigration laws have various options that are available to people. So, and I think it's just a matter of people becoming more informed about what's available to them, and then staying strong, throughout the process as they leave that situation. And then it's hard to recount everything that's happened. So even if you're removed from the situation, you go to speak with your attorney, and then that day you're like, why do I feel so exhausted? Or why do I feel, because it's triggering to have to go through all of that. So it's important to work with somebody that is familiar with this type of case, also to seek therapy and outside counseling, and to just be kind to yourself, gentle with yourself, and know that it's not one's fault for this having happened, and recognizing that there's something that can be done about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you put it so beautifully well. I think recognizing, but also being gentle with yourself and knowing that there is something out there to get out of this will be hopefully the next step. And I also feel that by us discussing this, by us bringing out such a sensitive topic and talking about this, is going to be a first step towards educating more women and bringing more awareness to women that there are options out there that you can pursue. So, yeah. I would just like to thank you so much, Jessica. It was such an insightful talk. I learned so much in the conversation. So thank you once again for sharing so much information. I would like to hand over the floor to Aditi to share her closing remarks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.